They weren't looking for her. They were looking for a dry trail west and a place to rest their horses before sundown. But Bramble, the bear, stopped without warning, turned his head toward the rocks, and growled low like something under the ground had spoken. Wade didn't ask why. He just followed the direction of the bear's gaze, and that's when he saw it. A figure, barely more than bones and cloth, crumpled beneath a jagged ridge. No movement, no sound, just the kind of stillness that either meant death or something worse. Wade Harlan had buried too many people to get curious, but something about the way Bramble stepped closer told him this wasn't finished. Not yet. What they found there would rewrite everything they thought they'd left behind. This is her story, and the fire it started never went out. Welcome to Souls of the Old West. Wade Harlan didn't trust many things in life, land deeds, distant cousins, or calm skies. But he trusted Bramble. The bear had more sense than most folks Wade had known. So when Bramble stopped moving and sniffed the dry wind like he caught something wrong in it, Wade didn't question. He eased. Saddle, hand resting near his sidearm, eyes scanning the broken desert in front of him. The land stretched in every direction, hard and cracked, with not much more than thorn bushes and the bones of things that hadn't made it. 30 feet ahead, near a sun-baked rock, something moved, or looked like it. It had moved once. Wade squinted. It wasn't a coyote or a dead deer. It was a person, a woman, crumpled like she'd been dropped from the sky and left to dissolve in the dust. No footprints, no trail, just her, the heat, and the silence. He walked toward her slow, not cautious out of fear, but out of something colder, certainty. People didn't end up this far out by mistake. As he approached, he saw her dress was shredded at the bottom, torn up like she'd crawled through a mile of thorns. Her skin was pale, almost gray, lips cracked and bloody, her arms bent at odd angles, and one eye swollen. Shut. She didn't flinch when he got close. That told him plenty. He crouched beside her and placed the back of his hand under her nose. There was breath, faint and dry, but breath all the same. He uncorked his canteen and tilted a few drops of water between her lips. At first, nothing. Then, a twitch. She jerked like something inside her was waking before her body could catch up. She coughed once, barely a sound, more dust than voice. But it was life clawing its way back up. Bramble circled the scene once, then sat beside her like he'd known her forever. Wade didn't ask questions. He'd stopped wasting words on dying people long ago. He slid his arms under her and lifted her slow, careful not to jar whatever bones weren't broken. She didn't weigh much, less than a sack of feed, but her body felt heavy with something else. Guilt maybe, or memory. He tied her gently to his saddle, her arms limp across the horn, her head resting against the leather. Bramble took the lead again without prompting, lumbering through the dust like a spirit that never slept. Wade followed on foot, not in a rush. The nearest shelter was the old hunting cabin by the ridge, half rotten but still standing. He hadn't stepped inside in 5 years, not since spring rains took out part of the roof, but it had 4 walls, a cot, and water nearby. Enough for now. They traveled without words, just hoofbeats and the slow, steady breath of a woman who wasn't supposed to be alive. When they arrived, the sun was already dropping, leaving long shadows across the dry earth. Wade carried her inside, cleared the cot of old rags, and laid her down. She didn't stir. Her skin was warm now, but too dry, and her breathing stayed thin. He ripped the sleeves off his shirt, soaked the cloth in water, and began wiping. The blood and dirt from her limbs, cuts along her legs, bruises down her side. Someone had worked her over or dumped her like she wasn't meant to get back up. He poured whiskey on the wounds and didn't flinch when she twitched. She didn't open her eyes, didn't speak, but her hand moved slightly, toward the edge of the cot like she was searching for something. Bramble laid down near the hearth and watched her. The bear's eyes followed every movement she made, ears twitching like he was trying to understand her breathing. Wade kept his rifle across his lap and waited. It was 2 full days before she came to. When she did, it wasn't with panic or fear, just confusion. Her eyes opened slow, blinking against the light, and settled on the wooden beams above her. Wade was sitting on the floor, watching, arms resting on his knees. "Water?" he asked. She nodded faintly. He helped her sit up. Just enough to drink, and she didn't stop until the canteen was empty. "Do you know where you are?" he asked. She shook her head. "What's your name?" A pause. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." Maybe she was lying. Maybe not. Wade had seen women lie to survive. He respected that. He didn't press further. Let her hold her secrets if she had any left. But he did notice something strange. When she raised her arm to drink, a scar showed along the inside of her wrist. A burn. Deliberate. Round and unnatural. Not from rope or fire, but something made. With intent. His stomach sank. He'd seen that mark once, long ago, and it was not a memory he liked waking. That night, she didn't sleep much. Neither did Wade. She kept turning her arm in the firelight, staring at the mark like it was a question that refused to be answered. Bramble never left her. Sighed. When the bear finally dozed off, he did it with one paw touching the frame of her cot, like some unspoken bond had been formed. Wade said nothing, just watched her watching the flame, both of them trying to make sense of something too broken to name. He didn't know who she was, didn't know where she came from, or who tried to erase her. But the desert hadn't finished the job. Bramble had found her for a reason, and Wade, against better judgment, had picked her up instead of walking away. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was the beginning of something he couldn't walk away from anymore. And that was how it started. Wade, the loner with more scars than memories, and the woman with no name, no past, and a scar that meant more than either of them could yet admit. Bramble had found her, and Wade had listened. Not to her words, because she hadn't spoken them yet, but to something. Older, deeper, some quiet pull that told him she mattered. Why or how, he didn't know, but she wasn't done. Not yet. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Past. She woke again just after dawn. This time she didn't flinch at the light or choke on her own breath. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking at the ceiling like she was trying to remember if it meant something. Wade was already up, sitting near the door with his boots off and his rifle across his knees. He watched her without speaking. Her body had stopped trembling overnight, and some color had returned to her face, but she still looked like a ghost borrowed from someone else's grave. She shifted under the thin blanket, stiff from wounds and cold sleep, and finally turned her head toward him. "Where am I?" Her voice was still weak, but less like smoke and more like paper. Thin, dry, but present. Wade leaned forward, placed a cup of water on the table next to her, and said, "Safe for now." She didn't ask anything more. She reached for the cup, but her hand shook so badly he had to guide it for her. He studied her as she drank. There was something off. Not just her silence, not just the way she kept touching the inside of her wrist absent-mindedly, but something in her eyes, like she was here but not quite here. When she finished, she let the cup fall back to the bed and turned her face toward the fire. Wade didn't press. Instead, he stood and walked to the edge of the room, letting the silence thicken like steam. After a long moment, she spoke again, barely above a whisper. "I don't remember anything." He turned slightly. "Not even your name?" She hesitated. "No, nothing. Just flashes, shadows, and hands and running." She looked down at her hands like they didn't belong to her. "I tried to bury myself, didn't I?" Wade nodded once. "Looked like it." She didn't cry, didn't even blink hard. She just lay there, soaking in the weight of it. Later that afternoon, as Wade boiled water and prepared what passed for a meal, he saw her watching her own wrist again. She was rubbing the skin with her thumb, slow and rhythmic. "What's that?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her wrist over and revealed the mark. A dark, round burn, too perfect to be accidental, too deliberate to be just pain. It was shaped like a ring, but more jagged, with edges like symbols he didn't recognize. He'd seen it once before, years ago, folded in the corner of a letter he wasn't supposed to read, next to a miniature portrait of a girl he was supposed to marry. He remembered the name, Evelyn Vale. Her family had money once and promises wrapped in secrets. She had vanished before they ever met. Wade didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the mark, and then at her face. "Do you know what that is?" She shook her head. Sure. She nodded again, but there was a pause, a breath too long. The rest of the day passed like a waiting room. She didn't ask who he was or where she'd come from or what he meant to do with her, and Wade didn't ask her to try harder to remember. He watched her instead, how she flinched when Bramble left the room, how she stared at the floor like it was full of ghosts. She never looked at the door, never once, like she knew better than to hope for escape. When night came and the cabin cooled, Wade offered her a thicker blanket and sat closer to the fire. Bramble curled between them, snoring softly, and the light from the flames danced across her tired face. "You need a name," Wade said finally. She blinked, startled. "Even if it's not yours. You can't keep walking around being girl or hey you." She hesitated, then turned her face to the window. "I like Ruth," she said, softly. The name didn't come from nowhere. It came from somewhere deep, like a half-remembered story. Wade didn't react. He just nodded. "Ruth, then." She nodded back, and for the first time since she'd opened her eyes, she almost smiled. Just a flicker, a curl of something that might have been warmth if it had been fed properly. Ruth. The name didn't match the dress or the mark or the silence, but it fit something. Maybe the way she held herself, maybe the defiance hiding behind her caution. It was enough. He stood up and tossed another log into the fire, then poured more water into the pot. Behind him, she shifted slightly, resting her head on her arm. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't answer, just stared into the fire, pretending he hadn't heard it, because gratitude felt too much like closure, and Wade knew damn well this wasn't over. Not even close. And when the fire burned, Lower and Ruth finally fell asleep. Wade sat awake, staring at her wrist again, the mark now barely visible in the dim light. He knew that shape. He'd seen it in another life, attached to another girl, lost before she ever became real. And now here it was again, carved into someone who claimed to remember nothing but had chosen Ruth, a name that didn't belong to a stranger. Wade didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in patterns, in reckoning, and in scars that never faded. Chapter 3. The Call for Vengeance. They found the body 3 days out, halfway to nowhere, tangled in a patch of thorn brush like it had been dumped without care. Wade spotted the buzzards first, circling slow, lazy loops above a rocky slope. Bramble caught the scent and veered right, pawing at the dirt and huffing. Wade dismounted, rifle in hand, and approached the shape lying face down, arms out like he'd tried crawling and given up. The man had been dead for a while, skin sunburnt and stiff, blood dried to rust along the back of his shirt. Wade flipped him over. One shot clean through. The chest. Execution, not battle. No papers, no bag, just a torn coat and dust-caked boots. Ruth didn't say anything. She stood a few paces back, staring. Then, she stepped forward, slowly, and knelt beside the corpse. She reached into the man's coat like she knew what she was looking for. From the inner pocket, she pulled out a coin, flat, black, carved with a crude symbol, a circle over a cross. Her fingers tightened around it. Wade watched her jaw clench. "Do you know that mark?" he asked. Ruth nodded once. "They wore these," she said quietly. "The ones who took me." Her eyes didn't leave. The coin. They had these on their belts, their guns, and on the papers they handed over. It wasn't random, it was organized. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then she added, "One of them said it was better this way, that I'd be useful to someone." Wade didn't answer. He just looked at her, and saw the wall inside her start to crack. Not from grief, from memory, the kind that slices back through the years like a knife made of fire. She stood, held out the coin and said, "I want to find them." Wade didn't ask if she was sure. Her eyes said everything. That night, he set up the targets, rusted cans, old bottles, and a cracked plate from a drawer in the cabin. Ruth had never fired a gun before. Her hands shook a little at first, but she held the grip with both palms, steadying herself like the metal could anchor her. Wade handed her his revolver, a well-worn .36 Colt, and stepped back. "Don't rush it," he said. "Breathe, then squeeze." She missed the first 3 shots. The 4th grazed the edge of a can. The 5th knocked one off the post. By the seventh, she'd split a bottle clean in two. He said nothing, just loaded the chamber again and handed it back. The next day, she beat her own score. The day after that, she didn't miss a single target. She never smiled, not once. Her training went beyond shooting. Wade taught her how to move without being seen, how to step through brush without snapping twigs, how to scan a room without turning her head. She picked away, it up fast, like her mind was wired for survival, not just existence. Bramble stayed close during those days, watching from the shade or tracking the perimeter like he knew something was coming. Ruth never let the coin out of her sight. She kept it tucked in her pocket during the day and under her pillow at night. Sometimes Wade caught her turning it over in her hand, whispering something he couldn't hear. She never said names, but he saw the list growing behind her eyes. Faces, voices, the kind you can't forget even when you want to, the kind that visit you at night and leave your hands curled into fists. One evening, Wade brought out an old rifle he hadn't touched in years. He cleaned it in silence, then handed it to Ruth. "Yours now," he said. She took it without ceremony, checked the chamber, and nodded. No thanks, no speech, just acceptance. That night she sat by the fire with the gun across her lap and stared into the flames like they were speaking to her. Wade sat nearby, rolling a smoke, letting her have the silence. He didn't ask what she remembered. He figured she'd tell him when it was ready, but he knew what it looked like when a person crossed the line between recovery and purpose. Ruth wasn't healing anymore, she was sharpening, and he'd seen enough war to recognize the edge of something that didn't forgive. The next morning, Ruth stood before Wade with the coin in one hand and the rifle in the other. Her face was steady, her voice low. They called themselves something. I don't remember the name exactly, but I know they followed rules, orders. There was a hierarchy, a seal. She looked at Wade. They weren't bandits. They were something older, something worse. Wade gave a slow nod. The kind that doesn't vanish easy. Ruth turned to look at Bramble, who had risen and stood beside her now. She gripped the coin tighter. "Then I'll make them vanish, one by one if I have to." Wade didn't answer, just picked up his own rifle and began checking the sights. And that was the turning point. The moment Ruth stopped being a survivor and became something else entirely. With a mark on her wrist, a coin in her hand, and a rifle that fit her grip like it had always belonged there. She wasn't running anymore. She was hunting. Chapter 4. The Hunt. The night they found the camp, Ruth didn't speak a single word. Her jaw was locked tight, her eyes locked forward, and the rifle strapped across her back might as well have been a piece of her spine. Wade rode behind her, his horse quiet beneath him, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on both of them. Bramble trotted low and slow between the brush, his nose twitching every few seconds, ears flicking back toward the trail like something behind them might catch up. But nothing did. Not yet. The camp was exactly where the man in the saloon had said, tucked deep, in the canyon behind a ridge of black stone, accessible only by a narrow trail no sane person would use unless they were running from justice or hiding from it. They waited until nightfall before making their move. Wade took the left slope, staying above the firelight and counting the men around the flames. 6, maybe 7. 2 women chained near the wagons. One guard half asleep with a shotgun across his lap. Ruth slid through the shadows like she'd always belonged to them, Bramble just behind her. When she got close enough to see their faces, something shifted in her posture. Her grip on the rifle tightened. Wade saw her lips move. She was counting. She raised her hand, 1 finger, 2, on 3, she fired. The first man dropped before he stood. The second didn't even turn around before a bullet cut him down. The camp exploded in panic. Wade moved in from the side, taking out the guard. Near the wagon, another man lunged toward the fire, reaching for a weapon. Ruth was faster. The 4th bullet hit his spine. The 5th hit his skull. By then it was only 2 left, and one of them was running. The runner didn't make it far. Bramble took him down, jaws locked around the man's leg and dragging him back into the circle of firelight like a prize too unworthy to eat. Ruth approached the last one standing. The man had frozen, arms raised, mouth open, not in fear, but recognition. "Ruth," he said, like the name had burned him. She didn't speak. just kept the rifle raised. He took a step toward her. Wait, I didn't know they were going to. The barrel didn't move. Your father, he made the deal, the man stammered. He signed the papers. He said it was better this way, that you'd be taken care of, that he'd be free of the debt. Ruth didn't blink. And you? She asked. What did you do? The man's lip quivered. I held the door open. Wade moved beside her but didn't say a word. It wasn't his moment. Ruth's hand trembled for half a second. Then she pulled the trigger. The man dropped like a sack of grain. When it was over, she walked to the chained women and broke the locks with Wade's knife. Neither woman could speak. One of them cried. The other just held Ruth's hand and didn't let go until she passed out from exhaustion. Bramble stayed near the wagons, while Wade buried the bodies with the help of the only shovel they found in camp. Ruth didn't help. She stood near the edge of the fire, staring at the last man she'd killed, the one who'd known her name, the one who'd spoken of her father. She didn't ask Wade to confirm it. She knew, in her bones, in her blood, in the way her chest ached like it had been split open and left hollow. Wade finished the last grave and returned to her side. You all right? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, he sold me. Not a question, not a theory, just a fact. Wade nodded once. Looks like it. That night they didn't stay in the camp. They lit the remaining supplies on fire, let the smoke rise high, into the stars, and took the freed women with them to a halfway town downriver. Wade didn't say much. He didn't have to. Ruth rode ahead, her hair tied back with a strip of linen, her face sharp as bone. The rifle never left her shoulder. Every step forward looked like it cost her something, but she didn't stop. In her silence there was weight, more than grief. It was clarity. She knew now what had happened, and she knew who had signed her away like land or cattle. Her father, her own blood. And that was a truth heavier than any bullet she'd fired that night. And so the fire behind them died. Down, leaving behind only ashes and the scent of something that could never be forgiven. Ruth didn't look back. Not at the graves. Not at the chains. Not at the man who had known her name before she remembered it herself. The hunt had begun long before that night. But now it had a direction. She wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was hunting betrayal, blood deep. And she wasn't going to stop until every last one of them paid. Chapter 5. The Revelation and the Purpose. They found the girl behind a collapsed mill on the southern edge of a mining town called Stone Bend. What was left of it? Most folks there either coughed coal dust or drank kerosene and called it whiskey. Wade and Ruth had ridden 5 days through broken canyons and dead riverbeds to get there, following rumors of a caravan that moved children like freight. The moment they stepped into town, Wade could feel something sour in the air, not in the wind or the dirt, but in the way people turned their faces. It was Ruth who heard the name first. Elsie. Whispers behind a brothel's curtain, from a woman with bruises that weren't new. A girl, 11, kept in a shack beyond the mill, working her fingers bloody stitching old cloth into something that passed for product. Ruth didn't wait. She didn't plan. She just moved. The shack wasn't guarded. Not because no one cared, but because no one believed anyone would come for the girl. The door was bolted with nothing more than a rope, and inside it smelled of rot, cloth, and rust. Elsie sat in the corner, hunched over a threadbare doll made of sack and straw. Her hands worked by instinct, not thought. Her eyes, too old for her face, didn't even blink when Ruth stepped in. Elsie? Ruth said softly. The girl looked up, didn't speak, just stared. Ruth crouched low, not reaching yet. You had a yellow ribbon, she added. That was the key. Elsie blinked once. You screamed, Ruth whispered. They gagged you. I was there. The girl's lips parted. You left, she said, no blame, just truth. Ruth nodded. I came back. This time she did reach, and Elsie let her. They didn't run. Ruth carried the girl out like a wounded animal, light, quiet, and too calm. Wade stood watch outside with Bramble, who sniffed the wind and kept low to the ground, growling at shadows. Once the girl was on the horse, Ruth climbed up behind her, arms wrapped around her like armor. Who owned the mine? Wade asked the man behind the tavern counter. Cyrus Hobb, the man muttered. Runs the whole town from that brick house near the hill. No one touches him. Ruth didn't even wait for Wade to respond. We're burning it down, she said flat. No debate, no question, just like before. But Wade saw something different in her eyes this time. It wasn't just fury. It was purpose she wasn't trying to destroy. Her past anymore. She was trying to rescue someone else's future. The fire came at midnight. Wade took the south gate. Ruth and Bramble circled to the back where the dogs were kept. The men guarding the house never heard them coming. A pickaxe through the ribs, a slit throat in the dark. One miner climbed to the roof with lamp oil. Another blocked the front door while Ruth dragged Hobb from his private wine cellar. The man begged. They always did. It was legal, he cried. I paid for the rights. Ruth didn't respond. She raised the revolver and said, she was 7, then shot him in the throat. The flames spread fast, catching the curtains, the beams, the walls packed with ledgers and deeds. They left the doors wide open, let the smoke tell the town what had happened. No one stopped them. No one tried. By dawn, they were miles away. Elsie slept in the saddle, curled between Ruth and Wade. She hadn't cried. Not once. But her breathing was different now. No longer tight, no longer fearful. Ruth braided a strip of cloth and tied it around the girl's wrist like a ribbon. She'll remember that, Wade said. Ruth looked at him. She already remembers more than she should. They didn't talk about what came next until nightfall when they made camp in a dry creek bed. Wade asked, you still want them all dead? Ruth didn't answer right away. She stared into the fire. I want them to disappear, she finally said. But now, I want to keep her safe more. Wade nodded. That was all he needed. Bramble laid beside the girl like a wall of fur and teeth. Ruth reached over and pulled the blanket higher over Elsie's shoulders. They'll come looking, she said. Then let them, Wade replied. And so the road shifted. What started as a trail of vengeance now carried something heavier, hope, reluctant and fragile, but real. Ruth still wore her gun, still traced the mark on her wrist like a compass pointing toward unfinished business. But now, there was a second heartbeat to protect. A girl with eyes too old and hands too small to carry the weight of what was done to her. Ruth wasn't just hunting anymore. She was shielding, and that changed everything. Chapter 6, The Legacy. A year passed, but the land didn't change. The same broken fences, same crooked towns, same men with hollow eyes who looked the other way when wagons went missing or girls vanished into the hills. But Ruth had changed. Wade had changed. And Elsie. Elsie had become something no one expected. She wasn't just alive. She was aware, sharp, quiet, watching everything. She learned to move without sound, to track prints even in dry brush, to fix a gun jam without flinching. Ruth trained her with discipline, not comfort. No softness, no lullabies, only truth. And Wade watched. Them both from a distance like someone guarding fire, not just for warmth but for the danger it carried. They worked out of a cabin east of Hollow Creek. Small, hidden, but not temporary. It was home now, not because it was safe, but because it was theirs. Ruth woke before sunrise most days. She'd sit on the porch cleaning her rifle while Elsie ran drills Wade had mapped out the night before. Bramble never left their side. Older now, slower maybe, but always alert. The bear knew who belonged and who didn't. He'd growl low when strangers passed too close, and those who heard it didn't stick around. Word had spread by then, about the girl with the scar on her wrist, about the man who trained ghosts, and about a child who moved like wind and struck like stone. People came to the cabin, women mostly, widows, sisters, survivors. They didn't come with questions. They came with names, and, Ruth didn't promise justice. She promised preparation. Some stayed. Others left with lessons that might keep them alive long enough to matter. That was enough. One morning, Elsie stood in the clearing holding a colt too large for her hands. Ruth stood beside her, silent. You ready? Wade called. From the edge of the trees. Elsie didn't answer, she just fired. The bottle exploded on impact. Ruth didn't smile, but she nodded once, a rare gesture of approval. Elsie holstered the weapon and looked to Wade. Again? She asked. He grinned. You're already better than I was at your age. Elsie shrugged, unconvinced. She wasn't chasing praise. She was chasing certainty, the kind Ruth carried in her spine and Wade kept in the way he loaded bullets without ever counting them. The world had taught her to survive. Ruth was teaching her how not to be hunted again. It wasn't vengeance anymore. It was preparation for a world that wouldn't offer forgiveness twice. At night, the three of them sat by the fire. No stories, just the rhythm of shared space. Ruth would clean her gun. Wade would mend gear or carve small symbols into the table edge. Elsie would trace the faded mark on Ruth's wrist, the one that started it all, and ask questions Ruth rarely answered directly. "Do you still remember his face?" she once asked. Ruth didn't hesitate. "Yes. Do you want to forget it?" Ruth looked at her for a long time. "No. I just want it not to mean anything anymore." That was the difference now. Memory wasn't a weapon. It was a scar. A fact. And scars didn't own her anymore. They just proved she'd made it through. By spring, others began carving symbols into the tree out front. Not names, not prayers, just marks, silent declarations of people who had survived something unspeakable. Wade called it the Ash Ring, after Ruth's brand. It wasn't a group, it wasn't an army, but it was something real, a legacy. They'd built it without even meaning to, and that was how it was supposed to be. No banners, no battles, just survival passed on like a skill. Bramble would lie near the roots of that tree, his head on his paws, watching each visitor come and go, as if measuring them, deciding who could carry what came next. And Ruth trusted him, always had. And when the sun dipped low and the fire crackled down to embers, Ruth would sometimes look toward the hills where ghosts once lived. She no longer feared them, no longer chased them either. She had new things to protect now, new people to teach. The war wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But for the first time, it wasn't just about fighting. It was about passing something forward. A strength not born from rage, but from purpose. Bramble's eyes would stay open late into the night, ears twitching, breath steady, loyal until the end. And Ruth, Wade, and Elsie, together, were no longer just survivors. They were the beginning of something that would outlast the fire. This was another powerful story from Souls of the Old West, where every memory from the past finds voice, justice, and redemption. If this journey moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know where you're watching from. The road goes on, and the next story is already on its way.